Spidey swings in from the 90s. Here's your look at the Diamond Select Gallery diorama statue of the 1990s Spider-Man. The bite from a radioactive spider granted Peter Parker amazing arachnid-like powers. After losing his beloved Uncle Ben to a burglar, grief-stricken Peter vowed to use his incredible abilities to protect New York as the Amazing Spider-Man. Peter's trials taught him an invaluable lesson. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. This 9-inch scale Marvel Gallery PVC diorama of Spider-Man is based on his 1990s comic book appearance and features a high level of detail and exacting paint applications. It is in scale to all gallery and femme fatale PVC figures. Before we get a closer look at Spider-Man, the first thing we're going to do is figure out how tall the 90s gallery statue of Spider-Man stands. Taking the tape measure, putting it not past his head, not past his hands, but instead right to the very tip of that extended out webbing that's shooting from his web shooters. That is, of course, the highest point on the statue. We're going to stop the tape measure right there. According to what I'm reading correct, and I'm hoping I am reading this correctly, the gallery statue of the 1990s Spider-Man stands 8.8 inches in height. And that in centimeters works out to be 22.3, a little over 22 centimeters tall. Like to send out a mad props to the folks over at Diamond Select who are nice enough to send the sample that we're having a look at in this review. If you are interested to swing to your local comic book stores right now to pick up this Spidey, you'd be out of luck. Comic book stores are currently closed right now, but Spider-Man from the 1990s is available right now through many online sites, and I would certainly encourage going that route if you so wish. And you have that itch, that spider-bitten itch, to pick up Spidey right now, and you just simply can't wait for comic book stores to open again. By all means, check out your local various online sites, which aren't necessarily local, you know what I mean. Needless to say, let's go ahead and pick up the statue. I was very much looking forward to this one because I've always been a big fan of the design choices that we went with. Certainly Todd McFarlane went with his design for Spider-Man here from the 1990s. Notably are the larger eyes and the more chunkier web, which we'll look at in a second. But before we do that, certainly we need to address the display stand that Spidey is partially perched on top of. Actually, his feet aren't even touching the display base. Instead, it's just his hand kind of holding him upright. The base is what I'm guessing to be the top of a rooftop area. This is a chimney, of course, and some smokestacks. I'm sure stating just the obvious. The coloring on it is actually quite nice. You can see the brickwork, the top of the section here, the top of the roof, and of course the little side accents look like they've all been done in a dark black plastic. In fact, I would actually even go one further to that. I'm guessing the entire base has all been molded in black plastic. The figure actually might have even also been molded in black plastic. And then, of course, artists then go in and paint these meticulously. Here they've painted in a lighter brown color just on the surface. You don't want to pass this too many times. If you do it just on the surface is where you sort of get the front foreground coloring, and then you have the background color of the plastic still left behind. It's a simple and effective way of actually bringing out some details without, like I said, having to go in there and meticulously add those little spots of black. It's already there. You're just adding the paint over top of it. Now, not all of this is that lighter brown color. What you also get here is some more rusted colors of kind of like a brownish silver. Why I say rusted is there's like little traces here of rust that's been speckled onto the surface. It's really effective the way that they've done that. Flip the statue upside down. Normally I would have maybe said that these are 4 felt feet or rubberized feet on the underside of the base. Spidey is one of those exceptions to the rule where he actually doesn't have anything like that. I know most of you people aren't going to be shifting these around like hockey pucks across your table that you don't want to be scratching surfaces anyways. But Spider-Man, you want to just be careful of. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be picking up the statue, you want to be picking up this way and not just sliding it across the table, because again, it may scratch the surface. The bottom of the base sticks out a little bit. Let me just show you what I mean by that. See, there's a little bit of an edge to it. It's not sharp, no, certainly not. but it would scratch tabletop surfaces. So again, when it comes to picking up the statue, I know I'm stating the obvious. Pick it up this way, and like I said, just put it down to where you want to decide to place this spectacular looking Spider-Man. Spectacular Spider-Man. I see what I did there. Getting a close-up look at the 90s version of Spider-Man, there's a lot of things I really like about this. The first and foremost, the main talking point, of course, is the fact that it's the 1990s Spider-Man. So things that are slightly changed out on this particular Spider-Man, I guess the biggest one, obviously, is the eyes. The eyes are elongated, stretching far past the point of the original Spider-Man mask would have originally been. I've always loved these eyes. And again, I don't feel like we get nearly enough love. There's love, of course, in the collecting world of people that loved and dug this design of Spidey. But I don't feel like there's nearly enough statues out there that are depicting the design duds here of Spider-Man with, again, those larger eyes. The nice thing about it, though, is they've added like this airbrushing of dark gray just along the top there, just along the top. And actually, that's not true. I was fibbing a bit. There's a little bit just underneath there, that it's not just a stark white. In fact, actually, all the surfaces of Spider-Man get treated to two tones, a two-tone effect. All the blues, for example, and reds get a secondary washing of black airbrushed across the surface. It's so that at least it's not the brightest. It doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. And it actually does look more practical, like something Spider-Man would be wearing in the comics, where you've got those highlights and lowlights happening. And Spider-Man definitely has a lot of that. Details certainly do stand out when you also add that additional airbrushing of dark coloring to it. Things like his musculature do stick out and stand out, I feel like, a little bit more because they add that airbrushing to it. Paint, for the most part, on Spider-Man can be tricky at best. You can either decide to go the route of painting in the webbing, which often at times makes it look too busy. Instead, what they actually have done, I'll just spin them around here instead. They actually haven't painted as many of the webs as you would think. Instead, they've only left it just to the sculpting to drive that home. So, like, if you look at it, the webbing itself is very compact, very close together. I feel like it's actually a little bit too close when you start looking at the areas of his torso, for example. I think it's probably just because they had so many rows of it that, of course, you still had to follow that all the way down, that it looks like there's maybe a little too many webs actually on Spider-Man's costume. You can see there's the Spider-Man logo there on the middle of his chest, and if we spin it around again, I think I'm just looking for a reason to spin this statue around, you can see the larger Spider-Man logo on the back. Unfortunately, it gets a little messed up here because you have the additional splattering of blue across that. A few little drops of red also make their appearance further down on the torso, and I feel like the emblem and logo of the spider, I was going to say Batman, spider on Spider-Man here, isn't the cleanest. It probably could have maybe had a sharp edge added to it so it stood out, especially along the top section here, where it gets a little bit lost against the backdrop of the blue. Interesting thing about this statue is not only do you get yourself a really interesting pose for Spider-Man, not one of which we've seen for a very long time for statue renditions, but you also get the inclusion of all this additional webbing. Now, the webbing is translucent plastic, so you want to be careful. I've a couple of times felt like I wanted to pick up the statue this way and quickly said to myself, stay away from that because this is going to be, of course, a little bit more of a brittle plastic. Another calling card for Spidey is the fact that in the 90s, he had more spaghetti webbing. I believe the term was spaghetti webbing, coined, of course, by fans. The spaghetti webbing here wasn't just simply just a strand of spider silk. Instead, actually, you had like a secondary wrapping that went around it. Something, again, that the artist got a little creative going with and sort of was the calling card for Spidey for the longest of times. I still feel like he kind of carries that tradition of spaghetti webbing for a lot of the comic renditions. The only thing about it, though, is if you look at the statue, he's got one that's shooting out from his web shooter in the one hand, and then he's got a secondary one that we just looked at behind him. You got to feel like he just used this webbing to land onto the rooftop. He's poised on top of the chimney before shooting a secondary web out and being on his merry little way. The webbing is a little on the thick side. I get granted, yes, that's supposed to be spaghetti webbing, but the webbing does appear a little on the thick side. I have to wonder if maybe Diamond Select had to go this route, because anything thinner than this would be even more susceptible to breaking. I mean, to be fair, I like the fact that it's done in a translucent plastic as opposed to being solid white. White in the comics would have been more the preferred color, but I feel like white on the statue might have actually been too stark a contrast. So I think actually going the route of a clear web or a slightly bluish tinted clear web, I think probably was the better route to go. It doesn't pull too much away from Spider-Man himself. I even like the fact that they've got that little spider suction cup that's been attached to the side of the chimney there, where you can see Spider-Man has landed before he's, like I said, on his merry little way again. Lately, this reviewer has really been getting into photography, taking a lot of stills and images of the pieces that we've looked at on this channel. If you certainly would like to see some of those images I've taken, you feel free to follow me along on Instagram, where I share many of them on there. This is such a great Spider-Man in that sense, because probably as you've seen, I've been kind of really moving this guy around a lot. There's a lot of cool different angles that I could imagine putting this guy in for photography. And I'm even thinking to myself right now, what am I going to use for the inevitable thumbnail of this particular review? Again, I'm thinking all this in the back of my mind. I also got to be thinking, too, that Diamond Select got a little giddy when it had a chance to sculpt a piece like this. Spider-Man from the 90s is a little bit more lankier in design, so it allowed the craftsmanship of those designers behind the scenes to really design out a neat-looking Spider-Man. A little bit more lankier, a little bit more malnourished, I would say, by comparison to the Spider-Man that we get nowadays. But it really gives the artist at Diamond an opportunity to really showcase things that you normally wouldn't even see on Spider-Man. Not only is the pose perfect for Spidey, but I think he's also got the perfect build as well. Couple that with the fact that he's also got a rich color scheme with those dark highlights and lowlights, really makes this a piece that's worth picking up if you're a big fan of the 90s Spider-Man. When it came to collecting comics, unfortunately the poor wall crawler here took a bit of a backseat in the 90s in favor of Detective Comics or Batman comics or anything I could really grab that featured the Cape Crusader. At $1.25 a comic, it was easy to spend my hard-earned newspaper route and get a good stack of comics, but it usually favored more DC comics than it was Marvel. Marvel may the odd time be where I picked up an X-Force title, an X-Factor title, or an X-Men title, and Spider-Man it was usually only relegated to standout issues. First appearance of Carnage, for example, anything with Venom, or if the cover stood out and appealed to me was the only time I picked up Spider-Man. Nowadays, though, when it comes to collecting Spider-Man comics, desperately I am to go back and find and get all the issues where artist Todd McFarlane was working behind the scenes. His magic working with the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is one of my all-time favorite looks for Spidey, and I have been slowly, as now of course the issues have gotten quite expensive, been interested in trying to collect every single issue I could, drawn by Todd McFarlane. Again, the design and look for Spidey was unique for its time, and still to this day, even though Spider-Man has sort of given up this look of the larger eyes, he sort of has found a medium, not quite the large eyes, not quite the small eyes, but kind of a happy medium in between. But it's still, for me, something I would love to go back to and eventually say, yes, I have collected all of Todd McFarlane's run on Spider-Man. It may, again, be a long-time venture of me collecting every single issue, and it certainly is going to get a lot more expensive, as the price point on Todd McFarlane drawn comics for Spider-Man have skyrocketed since. This is a good interpretation of Spider-Man pulled from the pages of Todd's work and depicted here as a gallery statue release. I like the design of it, I like the pose of it, and the paint really does bring out a lot of those cool details on a much lankier looking Spidey. There's not much I would actually change to this statue. Spidey at least looks good. The webbing I do feel is a little on the thick side. Now, to be fair, though, Spidey did have spaghetti webbing back in the 90s, so again, it works for this particular look for Spider-Man. I do feel like the webbing is a little bit thick, but I probably can understand that Diamond Select had to make the webbing thick enough so that it would be less likely to break. This would also be a well-welcomed alternate version costume. I would love to see this statue get re-released in the black costume, the symbiote costume. You wouldn't really have to change anything to it. You could keep the display base completely as is, keep the webbing completely as is, and simply just tweak the color scheme on this. I guess they probably would have to get rid of the webbing on his costume. but I would love to see Diamond Select give us this exact same Spidey in the black costume treatment. Make it happen, Diamond Select. Anyways, what do you guys think of this spectacular looking Spider-Man, even though spectacular is nowhere to be found on the package here? But what do you guys think of the Spider-Man, the 90s gallery diorama statue? Is it one of Diamond Select's best that they've produced for the wall crawler? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at Diamond Select who made this review possible by sending this sample my way. Again, if you are in the market and wanted to pick up the 90s Spider-Man diorama statue for yourself, you should be able now to find it through various online stores, or if you're willing to wait, I know it's not always the easiest to do, wait it out and wait until comic book stores open up yet again. And you can, of course, support your local comic book stores. They're depending on you guys once they open back up to bring in the business that they've lost, unfortunately, during these harsh times. So maybe, again, if you're willing to wait it out, hold off for the time being and pick up the 90s Spider-Man when your local stores are opening up yet again. Today, again, we were having a look at the Spider-Man, the Marvel Spider-Man gallery diorama statue from the 1990s design. Really liking the look of this. If you are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. If you haven't done so already, that is. If you haven't also done so already, make sure you hit that bell notification and stay tuned because there's going to be a whole lot of videos and statue reviews coming your way. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.